Betty, are you okay? The man asked. The question brought Betty back to the present. Yes, Fred, I am okay, just still not believing that Boyd is gone. Betty was sitting near her car that she had parked near the funeral home several hours later, dreading going back home. Fred, said Betty, Margie, and I want you to know we are here for you. Boyd was a close friend, and years ago we promised each other that we would watch over each other's family if anything happened to us. Betty smiled but told Fred, Boyd is gone and this is something I will have to face alone. Boyd had been buried in his hometown about 40 miles from where they lived, so she had a bit of a drive home. As Betty got on the main road, she passed by the Comfort Inn where she had last seen Boyd alive. Betty just turned her head back forward, trying to put the events of that horrible night out of her mind. Why was I so stupid? I had everything I had ever dreamed of. A nice home, 2 beautiful children, a great job, and of course Boyd. Betty remembered the night Boyd, playing on their high school's football team, made that miracle play and they had won the game. The smile Boyd had that night at the ice cream palace was the same one he had that last morning. Betty was an executive assistant to a local business owner and Boyd was the general manager of the local grocery store. They had been together for the last 24 years. Betty was also concerned about her kids. The oldest daughter was in her last year of high school and her baby daughter was starting the 10th grade that next fall. They were crushed upon learning of their father's death as well as the circumstances around what happened. Betty wanted to hold both and comfort them, but during the funeral they were standing close to Boyd's folks and refused to even look at her. Betty had first met the affair partner during a business meeting and within days she was in his bed. Her oldest daughter was the one to first notice something was wrong, and she confronted her mom. Why did I not stop that foolishness the day my daughter told me something was off about her? Boyd most likely would still be alive. When Betty got home, she was hoping the girls would come home and the 3 of them could spend some time together and start the healing process. By 10 p.m. Betty gave up and went to bed. That next morning Betty was sitting in her dining room playing with her breakfast when she heard car doors slam in the driveway. She got up to see who it was and took a deep breath when she saw her daughters along with Boyd's parents coming up the steps to the front door. Betty opened the door and all 4 of them walked into the house. Boyd's parents did not speak to her. They simply told the girls to call them later when they were ready to leave. When Betty heard that comment she got angry and told them both of those girls are underage and I make those decisions. Boyd's father looked at Betty and shook his head and he opened the door for his wife, and they exited the house and left. Betty could hear the girls talking in the bedrooms and walked into the hallway. When the oldest daughter saw her mother, she angrily slammed the bedroom door in her face. Then about 2 seconds later the baby daughter did the same. Betty wanted to forcefully confront them both but thought better of it and returned to her now cold breakfast and coffee. Boyd's parents were planning to go to a local diner to have some breakfast while they waited on their granddaughters to pack some clothes and they would return to pick them up. Boyd's father had already spoken to the sheriff the previous afternoon and the sheriff about the court order they had obtained that morning, and the sheriff and a deputy would join them when they got back to the home to serve Betty and make sure the girls got out with as little as possible trouble with Betty. That morning their attorney took some time to carefully show the judge the video from the Comfort Inn and the judge spoke to the girls. Both were positive they did not care to live with their mother any longer. The judge signed the order and his clerk put a hearing on the upcoming court docket. By the time the girls called them, the sheriff was already in the parking lot and they left headed to the house. Betty did not hear them drive up as she was in the basement looking for some documents. She wanted to talk to the girls and was surprised when she came up to see the sheriff standing in her living room. He asked Betty for her full name, and he served her with the judge's order. She was being forced to hand over the girls to Boyd's parents and was told of the upcoming hearing date. All of the events of the past week overpowered Betty and she collapsed in an easy chair. Betty, the sheriff continued, you are also not allowed to enter your in-laws' property and you are also not allowed to enter the school grounds unless invited by a school official. If you do so you will be spending the night in my jail. Do you understand, Betty? He asked. Yes, Sheriff, I do. By this time the girls had loaded up most of their clothes and were outside waiting. Betty started crying as she watched her daughters leave. What have I done? Betty asked herself. Why did I allow myself to fall for that man's charms? Betty's mind went back to that fateful day when she finally agreed to spend the day in the Comfort Inn with that man. It had been raining that day, and by the time both got into the room both were wet. Betty removed her clothes and used a hotel towel to dry her hair. She spent several hours in that hotel and remembered enjoying that time. When she was finished, she went home. Her boss was out of town handling some business and only needed Betty to be available if he needed some information. So she was able to have all calls to that office extension forwarded to her cell phone. So, for the next few months Betty would spend time in the Comfort Inn when her boss was out of town on business. Until one day her daughter, while sitting at the dining room table, asked her why was she at the hotel. Betty froze but quickly came up with a reply. I was there to get some information for a client. Okay, the daughter said, and that was all. Later, alone in her room, the daughter took note that her mother had lied to her. The daughter had left out she had been seen there many times over the last few weeks before. She was certain her mom was cheating but did not want to hurt her father. She was hoping her question would make her mom stop. Betty thought about that day when her daughter asked her about being at the hotel. I could have stopped it then. Why was I so stupid? The day Boyd caught her started earlier that day with a phone call from their accountant who needed some information. He needed Betty's social security information and Boyd did not have it. So, he said, well, I will plan to have lunch with Betty and get it from her then. Boyd then got an office telson and started to cross-check and make sure some barcodes showed the correct prices for that upcoming week. Then about 11:30 he told the office clerk he was going to eat lunch and left. Boyd did not call ahead. He drove almost 2 miles from the store to the building where Betty worked. Funny, Boyd said to himself, I don't see Betty's car. So, he dialed her office number and on the third ring Betty answered out of breath. Betty, where is your car? Boyd asked. I am at the Franklin building and need to speak to you. Betty told him I am doing some errands for my boss and will be back shortly. Boyd was perplexed because he swore he used the main office number, not Betty's cell number. He asked Betty, why are you forwarding calls to your cell phone when your boss already has that number and the answering machine will get calls? Betty got angry and told Boyd, I will see you at home tonight and please stop questioning me like this. Boyd was not all that tech savvy, but he knew how to use the GPS app to locate Betty's phone. He did so and located it. That location was about a half-mile away and he got in his car and made that trip. When he got there, he saw Betty walking out adjusting her clothes and saw the condition of her hair. Because Boyd was closer to Betty's car than she was, he was standing next to the driver's door when she got to the car. When Betty tried to speak, Boyd cut her off. Betty, Boyd said, you have lied to me about where you were. I can see your hair is a mess and watched you adjusting your clothes. Betty, I don't care who it is. He won and he can have you. Then Boyd started crying when he started thinking about his precious daughters. In a daze, Boyd turned around and got in his car. The highway patrol later determined Boyd's car was doing around 80 miles an hour when it left the road, then hit a power pole. Then landed about 100 feet off the road. By the time the ambulance arrived, Boyd was gone. When they closed the ambulance door, they called and the patient was code 4 and they were en route. After Boyd left the hotel, Betty went home. She was crying when she got home and did not see Boyd's car. She wanted to talk to him, so she called the store and was told he had not returned from lunch. About the same time the daughters arrived after school, a highway patrol officer was knocking on the door. All three of them were standing in the living room when Trooper Collins told them he was sorry to have to report this, but their husband and father had a bad auto accident and did not make it to the hospital. The oldest daughter knew something was wrong and looked at her mother. Mother, you kept seeing that man, didn't you? What happened to my daddy? Betty broke down and told both daughters as well as Trooper Collins what happened. Trooper Collins walked out to his patrol car and made a phone call to the investigating officer at the victim was under extreme emotional distress at the time of the accident. Both daughters ran out of the house and about 2 hours later arrived at Boyd's parents' home. Betty spoke to an attorney about the court order and that attorney told her the chances of getting those teenage daughters back are low. Then later Betty was called into her boss's office, and he asked her was it true. Betty said yes. "Clean out your desk, Betty, and get out of this building." At the hearing the judge ruled in favor of the grandparents and watched as the movers moved their things from the house. That afternoon Betty called an old college friend that lived in Colorado and told her about everything. That friend told Betty, "Come on and stay with me while you restart your life." On her way out of town Betty stopped at the post office and mailed 2 large envelopes. One was to her daughters and contained the deed to the house. Then she mailed a full confession to her lover's wife. Smiling as she did so. "Honey, if I am going down, so are you."